Hello and welcome back to the roundtable here at Counseling Solutions. Today we are with Miss Tiffany and we are with Miss Crystal, and we are discussing empty nesting today, and then also being a military spouse and making the transition from coming out of the military, or really just being a military spouse and all that it entails, and some of the stress that goes along with it, along with the joys and perks. So to begin, Miss Crystal,
Yes, ma'am.
how about we pick up where we left off last time with empty nesting?
Yes, sounds good.
Yep.
So we had talked a lot about the transition, you know, when you have younger kids and then when they kind of grow up, and then you're left with no kids to take care of, and then you're left in that situation. What do we talk about now? What is our focus? And people have a lot of problems transitioning into that because they focus for so long on kids and career, and then you may get to the point where your kids are grown, you're getting ready to retire, and then you just kind of have to spend time just together. And it's like, how do we do that? And it can be really hard, especially if a lot of that time, as you were married before, with the kids, became just about them.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't take time to spend with each other, if you didn't take time to continue to nurture that relationship, and it became mostly about the kids, then you're left with,
Mm-hmm.
who is this person?
Mm-hmm.
I don't even recognize them. And so that can be really hard, but it's not impossible
Mm-hmm.
to rebuild what you once had. It's almost like you have to know that you're starting over,
Mm-hmm.
that you can date again, that you can have adventures together, get to know each other again, because people change over the years. People don't always, they aren't always the same person you married when you were younger. So as you reach that empty nest or that retirement age, and you're going, okay, do I even like this person?
Yes.
It can be very difficult. But I think a lot of the focus and the mindset has to be, let's try this thing. Let's get to know each other. Let's figure out what each other likes to do, and let's really work at it, because it's work. Marriage is always a work in progress. If you're not willing to put into the marriage, then you're not going to get anything out of it. Mm-hmm. So I think that it can be a big struggle, but I don't think it's impossible.
And I like what you said about the freedom, like the freedom to tell yourself, I don't know this other person
Mm-hmm.
sitting at my dining room table anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And they're different, and that they're doing things I'm not expecting, things I don't like.
Mm-hmm.
And the freedom to tell yourself that's okay,
Mm-hmm.
and the freedom to say, because the more you see the shoulds, the more you fight against what you want to be, this happily ever after, this now we have the retirement time of our lives. If that's not the reality, you might fight it really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Accepting that will then allow you to build.
Absolutely. Being able to say, I don't know if I like this person.
Yeah.
It's okay, and but it's also, you have to say, I'm not wanting to give up on that.
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to keep that marriage alive, you have to have that mindset of, what will I do to fix it? What will I do to make it work?
Yeah.
Not what will the other person do for me.
Yes.
A lot of times we get stuck in that rut of that. What am I going to get out of it? What am I going to get from that other person? How are they going to make me feel comfortable in this situation? Yes, there's that element, but what are you doing for yourself in that situation? What are you doing for that other person? I think marriage, at least, 50 to 80% of a marriage is looking at, what am I going to do for that other person?
Mm-hmm.
How am I going to make my partner a part of this, this relationship? How am I going to communicate with my partner so that they understand me?
Yeah.
If they don't have that, if all of you're focusing on in the relationship is, what am I getting out of it, then you're not giving anything.
Yeah.
And so you're probably not going to get much out of it.
Absolutely.
So marriage, I know from experience, it takes a lot of mindset of, what am I doing for my partner? How is my partner doing right now? Because if you're not checking in with each other, like, just how are you doing? you can miss a lot. You can miss a lot of emotional turmoil that your partner may be going through that, you know, especially with kids, day-to-day stuff just gets in the way, and then you don't even know what your spouse is going through. You can miss a lot. So those, I mean, I think dating throughout your marriage is important. I think that alone time with your partner is vital to keeping not only your kids happy, but, you know, the marriage happy. Because kids sense that disconnect between their parents. And then especially when you're getting to that empty nest syndrome, if there's that disconnect, it's just you guys. So you're gonna feel it. So it's important to reconnect that way.
And keeping the honesty in the relationship, you know, as Tiffany was saying before, you know, it's so important to remain honest about who we become as we evolve, along with the fact that, you know, with empty nesting, especially in this environment, empty nesting and retirement comes so much earlier in comparison to, you know, the environment outside of this environment, I mean the military environment. It comes much sooner. So you find yourself as an empty nester, you know, in your late 30s, mid 40s, sometimes early 50s. And here you are, you still have all this life, this vitality in you, but you look across the table and you see the other person, it's like, wow, X amount of years have gone by. Who are you? Who am I? And I think a big question that comes to the table, particularly with women, not to just hone in on being female, but being so engrossed in being a mom and being a mother, a lot of times we lose who we are. And that's another terrifying aspect too. With the whole deal is looking in the mirror and saying, who is that person? And do you like the person who's looking back at you?
And
that's a challenge.
And also admitting that sometimes you don't even know who you are. And being able to admit that to your spouse. Like, I'm kind of figuring out who I am right now. I'm, you know, I hope that you're okay with that, you know, but this is who I think that I am. This is where I feel like I am now and who I want to be. That's the other part to communicate to your spouse, your goals, your interests, your desires. Because if you don't have that understanding of what you and your spouse want, you could have different goals and you're just driving along with different goals going down different lanes, and you're both clueless as to what the other person's doing or trying to accomplish. And so that's really important along the way, to check in with each other, to update each other with your goals, but to be honest with yourself, like you said, that sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes you just are figuring it out, and to be okay in that moment, with each other, to be patient. I think patience is so important with your spouse and with yourself. Because I mean, if you're at that stage where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing next. You know, when my kids left, I don't know who I am without them. I don't know who I am if you're leaving a job. You know, retirement and the military comes pretty early for some who, you know, joined at 18, and you know, you're out by the time you're 38. 38. Then you have a whole identity you have to kind of create for yourself, and to be able to be honest with how you're feeling with your spouse and with yourself, and to be patient with that process is very important.
Because it is a process. It takes some getting used to, you know, all those years, I mean, for the spouse and for the service member. In some instances, you have two service members in the same household. So it's making that transition in those steps, those progressive steps along the way with, I've done this for so long. What else do I know? What else does he know? It's coming off of the ride, so to speak, because, you know, every so many years you transition, you go somewhere new, and then all of a sudden you're not doing that anymore. So it's like the planning process changes, all those adjustments that come with it. Adjusting to being in the house with him, and adjusting to being in the house with you, because, you know, it's different. It is so different. The house becomes quiet because the kids aren't there. Or you're shopping, your grocery list changes. That's another adjustment.
You have to learn how to cook for two instead of how many ever you had before. That's hard.
It's the little things.
I am curious if you ladies would think, what are some practical ways to begin that process of, I've realized, like, let's say, I've realized I've lost who I was, or I put so much energy and needs I didn't even realize into my kids, and I'm feeling that anxiety, that almost fracturedness of not feeling like I have that core of stability anymore. How would you guys even recommend kind of practical, like step by step, starting to gain or good practices?
So from basically what I'm hearing from your question is like when you're in that mode of figuring out who you are
and figuring out
how to do it from there. I think, again, patience with that process and with yourself is important. Honesty with who you are and being able to say, okay, I may not know who I am and who I want to be, but it's okay in that moment to feel that and to then kind of moving forward. I think creativity is important. Being able to be adventurous, go out into your community and say, what's out there? What can I be a part of? I think friendships in the military and in a marriage can be very important.
Absolutely.
Because if you are in a relationship for so many years and it's just you and him, or just you and your partner, and there's no other friendships, no other relationships that you can turn to, then when you feel alone with him and not knowing how to connect with him or her, you have no one else to turn to. So I think
give yourself an outlet.
Exactly. I think allowing personal time to figure that out, to say, okay, I don't have to be with you with every waking second of the day. It's okay to spend time apart. While it's important to spend time together, allowing yourself time to spend apart, to figure out what you want, to be adventurous, there are tons of things that, because I'm a military spouse, have moved everywhere, and each new community has so many different things to offer, and I've had to become very adventurous. I've lived in Germany and a completely, different country, and so moving there, you had to figure out your surroundings. That's the one thing the Army has taught me as a military spouse, how to be adventurous, how to get out of your comfort zone, because how to adapt to where your new surroundings are. And I think that is important in those transitions as well, to be able to say, it's okay that I'm nervous about going out and figuring out and meeting new people. It's okay that it's uncomfortable, but to know that it's still a very important part of who you are going to become, and how you're going to find out who you are is to relate to other people around you.
Sure, and it's also a time of self-discovery. I think it's okay, looking in the mirror and really not knowing who she is, but it provides you with an opportunity to self-discover. Our likes change, our dislikes change, our temperament changes, our tolerance for certain things changes. At one time we may have had a low tolerance for something or another, and as time went on, it wasn't that big of a deal. So it's like, the dishes, we'll get to it. It comes with time. So it's all about part of that self-discovery, and again, being able to adapt to something new, because you're conditioned to it. It's sink or swim. Either you're going to adapt to what's going on around you, or you're going to pull your hair out and it's like, I can't do this, but without even giving yourself an opportunity to do it. So it's allowing yourself that time of self-discovery and figuring out what you like, what you don't like, what works for you, what doesn't, and even going somewhere new that the two of you haven't been before, and it's a time to discover that thing together. Trying new foods, new cultures, new environments. We get deeply rooted in what we call home, and so living abroad it helps, but then again, do we ever revisit those places we liked the most? Do we ever plan to say, you know what, I really enjoyed my time in Germany, because Europe is so small. We didn't get to Italy. Let's do that. It's making those new plans, but just the two of you. And you don't have to take the family photo like, is your face clean? Did you pick your nose? Doing that stuff. It's just the couple. And discovering one another.
As a military spouse, I feel like a lot of times, I'm also a military spouse, it's easy to get in the habit of waiting. Because when you move with your soldier, somebody's there, a job is there, people are there waiting to accept your soldier, and then let's say you're a stay-at-home mom or what have you, you go there and you wait for your soldier to come home for dinner, and you are waiting. It's almost like it's easy to get in that. I'm very focused on waiting on the military to move you. And everything you guys have said has been taking the active, the offensive role of going out and trying things, finding out who you are as an individual and as a couple. And the other thing that comes to mind for me is if you feel like you are kind of grasping, like sinking, not knowing who you are, starting with what you do know. What are your core values? Even writing down a list. What things are still very important to me? And then start with that. What you don't know can change. Then you go out and explore and find out what you don't know. And then you can see what things are still the same. And some of them may not be the same as they used to be.
Yeah. I like how you talked about the values and writing them down. And, you know, I think interest, writing those down as well when you're, especially like as a military spouse coming into a new community. And you're like, I know nothing about this area. I don't know anybody here. Just being able to know what you're interested in and kind of being adventurous with that list. Coming here, we love the water, and there are so many lakes in this area, and it's the first time after we've been married for 16 years, we got kayaks last year, and we started kayaking on the lakes, and those kinds of things, like we never knew if we liked that or not, but we, you know, had tried it out one day, had borrowed a friend's kayak, and we loved it, and so we're like, this is a new interest for us. Being able to be open-minded with those interests and say, let me explore this area. Let me explore my interests in this area and what's available. Getting out of your comfort zone can be very important. I know I've been to certain military installations where I felt very isolated based on what I was doing. If I was a stay-at-home mom because my babies were little, or if I was working, it still could feel very isolating. But I think a lot of military spouses struggle with that mindset of, I'm just in transition, I don't know anybody, especially if it's their first move. I'm just going to stay in my house and not go out and do anything. And you get stuck, and you get depressed, and you get miserable, and you're like, I hate this place. And it's like, do you even know that place? Have you even gotten out to discover anything about that place? You could be on some of the military installations are very small and there's nothing around them, but there is, you just haven't explored it. So I think that's important, not only with transitioning from place to place as a military spouse, but going back to transitioning out of the empty nest is explore your interests. Maybe you like painting and you never knew it, you know. Maybe you're an arts and crafts person and you never tried something else in that realm, like, oh, maybe I like to do pottery now, you know. There's so many things that can kind of open up to you if you have that mindset of, let me figure out what I like. Let me figure out what me and my spouse like together, you know, because there's so much more freedom when your kids are older, and you don't have to worry about getting a babysitter and how much it'll cost, because then you have to add in the cost of how many hours I spent to do it to pay the babysitter. You don't have to worry about that. It's more freedom. It's more opportunity to say, let's go rock climbing. We don't have to carry a baby on our back, you know, something adventurous to spark your interest. Now, you may not have any of the same interests. You may be like, I've explored all of this and I love this, and my spouse has nothing in common with me and does not want to participate. Continue to research, continue to explore, and have an open mind.
It's easy to become complacent too. I think one of the things that I've seen with spouses having been on active duty and worked with young couples, especially young couples, that's the thing. That fear is so, you know, it's so overwhelming to the point, like you said, you don't come out and you don't know what's out there, and the fear is really of the unknown. And whether or not, you know, being in a foreign country, you know, you're going to be able to communicate because of the language barrier, or if they're going to accept you, or if it's going to be an issue because you're different in comparison to that culture, what the reception is going to be like. And the big surprise is, I mean, you saw it. Have you been overseas yet? The big surprise is they're just as eager to know about you as you are about them. And there's an exchange of cultural differences. And the biggest thing is food. Food is a huge deal. That sparks the greatest conversations and will lead to some of the most meaningful relationships with people from other countries, because you find out you have common interests. You introduce them to something that was very special to you as a dish, a macaroni and cheese coming up. If your mom made the best macaroni and cheese and always made you feel better, and you share that with someone from another culture, another country, then it's like, oh, wow, I think I kind of like mac and cheese, you know? So it changes. Or if you've never had schnitzel before, it's like, oh, this is good. So it's having that experience and being open and receptive to something new.
Yeah. And I know that there's different personalities and people are different. They're like, I'm not a people person. Don't make me get around a crowd of people. I don't want to be in the middle of that. I get that. I have a little of both sides. Like, I'm an introvert on sometimes. I'm like, I just need to be alone. Just let me go in my room, be by myself, and I need that time. And then there's sometimes I'm like, I need people. Regardless of whether or not you're an introvert or an extrovert, people are important. Being able to develop relationships, even if it's one or two, to be open to them. Military life can be very isolating if you don't get out and develop those relationships. Those relationships can also be dangerous in the military lifestyle. There's a lot of, the military culture is very just famous for the infidelity and the gossip chains and the stereotypical military families that get a bad rap. And I think a lot of that can happen when you aren't as adventurous. You're like, oh, I know my neighbor and we talk about everything, and then we get super close, and then you don't explore any other relationships, or you don't explore your community. You get still stuck in that rut, if that makes sense. And it can be, some of them can be bad influences. I mean, I've been in those situations where I'm like, I need to not be around these people. They're great to, get to know as acquaintance, but I know I have to limit myself because temptation is everywhere. And the marriage situation in the military, if you want to keep your marriage, you have to be aware of the situations you put yourself in. You have to be mindful of that and say, it's okay if she goes out with my husband and spends a night. No. You have to be careful of that. Even if you think it's harmless at first, temptation is just out there. And it can be something that you can easily fall into even if you have no intention. So I think while people are important, alone time can be important, you also need to know boundaries in relationships. You need to say, these people are right for me, these people are not. And this relationship is good for me and this one's not. So I don't know. I mean, I know you're, as a military spouse, have you had situations where you're like, I have to limit myself? Yeah,
definitely. Whether it is with other military couples, you get to, like, we have a couple that we have been at the same duty stations for the last 5 years. Like, we know each other very well. It would be very easy for me to be friends with the husband of that couple. But for me, that's a boundary I'm not going to go into because I already feel comfortable with him as couples. I do not need to be alone friends with him. So my husband and I, even his first deployment, we wrote a list of our boundaries with members of the opposite sex. What are we okay with as a couple? And we know the other person is abiding by that as well. So it gives us confidence when they're gone, a lot more trust that we've already established that ahead of time. And then he has trust in the sense that he knows what I'm going off of while I'm here. So yeah, we found that necessary.
You touched on a very big issue in the military, and that's my spouse is gone. My spouse is deployed. My spouse is in training. What do you do when they're not there? And then how do you adjust when they come back? I think those issues are some of the biggest struggles within the military community is how do you maintain a relationship with someone that's been gone for a year? And then they come back and you don't really recognize who they are because of what they've experienced and what you've experienced while they've been away. Again, I think patience with yourself and that adjustment period is important, as well as being adventurous and knowing your boundaries. Do you have any other recommendations for that?
I think some spouses go through that happily ever after, even just not just when they're gone. When they're gone, it sucks. But for when they come back, there's like this fairy tale reunite. I think that spouses get in their mind.
Like honeymoon phase.
Exactly. And they expect the honeymoon phase. And I think that can set up for a lot of disappointment.
Absolutely.
I think setting up for events and fun things to do together and ways to reunite, activities, don't just come home to the house and just settle in and dig back in. So I think events to get out and enjoy being outside instead of just 100% with each other constantly in a house doing nothing. So that way you can kind of relearn, you can see their reactions, you can kind of get a slower feel for that person and allow yourself like some patience. That's the one that comes up a lot.
There's that reintegration period that, you know, not only does the service member need, but the spouse needs that too.
Oh, man.
Because, you know, with them being gone, I mean, it should be a relationship where you share the responsibilities. You know, you go pay these utilities and I'll catch these because you're here, I'm there, it's more convenient. But when he or she is away, it's all on you. So you develop this sense of independence in having things done or getting them done your way. And then when he or she comes back, it's like, but that's not how I did it. But the point is, it's still got done.
Yes.
And that's where the message kind of gets lost in translation.
And being able to relinquish some of that control. Because you don't, it's a lot of responsibility. And you say, I can do it because I have to. And yes, that's an important part. But when you take over all of that role and the responsibility that's normally shared, you have to be, I think, like you said, the magic word, expectations is important. You have to know what you expect coming in and be flexible with that expectation. Because you know, okay, he's going to come home. I'm going to be able to give him all of this to do. And I'm not going to have to maintain all of this anymore. But then he's like, don't throw that on me. You know, I have no idea how to pay the electric bill online because you've been doing it for a year without me. You need to allow that transition time, allow the time for yourself to say, I gotta let go of this and let him do it, or, you know, her do it. I've got to kind of let go and be patient and be flexible, because having the mindset of it's got to be this way is setting you up for failure.
Absolutely.
Like, they've been functioning, they've been functioning in a different culture, and they have known their other culture for however long, 9 months, however long they were gone, and they come back home, and I think it's easy to point at all the things they're doing wrong or a different way than what you want it done, and then they can become the bad guy really quick, and it would be very easy to point a lot of negatives at them, and I think or even if you don't feel like you're doing negatives, you're just telling them how you would do it differently. I think that can still come off as a lot of criticism, especially when they're shifting. So I think that can be something to be aware of too.
And just to be aware of what your perspective is, because if you've got young kids and they've been away for 9 months to a year, and they come home and you're like, here, you can handle her. They don't know who that person is anymore. Either one of them, daughter doesn't know dad, dad doesn't know daughter. He doesn't know exactly what she likes and what she doesn't. She has, if she has certain food taste, and you're like, here, I'm going shopping, and she throws a temper tantrum because he's not doing it right.
And he feels like a failure.
He feels like a failure. Yes, allowing that flexibility, that time to adjust and not criticize and not say, well, why can't he get it right? Or why can't she tell me what to do? There's big learning curves, because so much changes with the kids in a year. I mean, there's so much, even if you're in touch all the time over, the phone and all that, they still miss out on the little things. And those little things can make a big difference when you're connecting with a person. So, I think being able to be aware of all of that I can't have a certain mindset and expect certain things to behave a certain way and then get all upset and blame the other person when it doesn't happen the way I want it to. You have to be flexible and know that sometimes when you're coming in from a training or a deployment, your spouse is coming in, you're like, yay, they're home, I get to have more free time. And they're like, I need some adjustment time. I need some time alone. It's overwhelming. I don't know how to do this. And you got to figure out the ebb and flow of how things will work, and expect it to take time. It's not going to happen. And sometimes they get some adjustment time when they get home to be at home. like 2 weeks,
Yeah.
sometimes that's not going to be enough time.
It's
It's not going to be fixed by the time they go back to work.
It's
It's not. And then when they go back to work, you've got to adjust to that again. So being flexible, being willing to communicate those expectations, this is how I thought it would go, and it's not going the way I want. Being able to tell each other that.
I know. Doesn't usually come out as pretty and packaged near as nicely as
it doesn't.
And here.
Having been deployed and knowing how important that decompression period is,
Yeah.
it's needed. It is so needed, and it's never enough. You know that proverbial 2 weeks.
Yeah.
10 days is good. It's never enough because, again, you know, you think about the individual coming from a very high, intense environment, you know, where that adrenaline is constantly at optimal, you know, it's peaked out. And then to have to come home and do a power surge, and it's like people expect you to do it instantaneously, and it doesn't work that way. And it's in that period in which you're trying to decompress and trying to come to, you know, a point where you've leveled off, that the stuff starts to happen. And it's like, and whereas you couldn't necessarily, because it's not professional to do, to overly express yourself, I'll put it that way. Overly express yourself. You know, be as passionate as you would like to be when it comes to a disagreement. You come home and those boundaries aren't there. And you have that significant other, and he or she may end up bearing the brunt of whatever it is that you were feeling and holding on to within that time period. So being able to recognize that too, and knowing that it is a part of it. It is a huge part of it, but being honest enough to identify it and address it and say, hey, look, I'm trying to decompress. I need that decompression. In order for me to give you the best of me, allow me time to decompress. You know, and when you're home, you need time to decompress too, because you know you're peaked out. I mean, you're running at top speed, and when he comes home or she comes home, it's like, oh, I can breathe. Kind of, sort of.
Hold your breath a little more.
Just a little bit, But at some point, do remember to breathe. Would you agree? Remembering to breathe.
Remembering to breathe. Remembering that it's okay that you don't have it all together all the time. That you make mistakes, that you can admit that you made a mistake, that you can talk with your spouse and say, I don't know what I'm doing. You know, that's important for them to be able to connect with you on that level, to say, I'm trying, you know, I'm trying my best. And then to open yourself up to hearing what they have to say and how they're trying and what they're working hard to do. Because sometimes it becomes a competition. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, either one of you, but you get in that mood in your marriage where you just like, you're competing with the person of who did what first or who said what and what's more important. And you can, every relationship falls into these ruts where you'll be sitting there going, why am I competing with, I have to have the last word. Like, why does that matter? You know, a lot of times we forget the point that it's the message that matters, not how it's done. And we get caught up in the routine of, okay, you have to hear what I have to say and you have to understand it. And it's like, no, they don't have to agree. They won't always understand. They won't always get your perspective on that. But how do you work through that even though that doesn't happen? It's, you know, being able to say, okay, we don't see eye to eye. Now what? That's okay. You know, it's okay not to be on the same page sometimes, because it will happen. It's moving forward with the goal that you still want to work together. You still want to know what the other person feels and thinks. I think a lot of times if that's missed, and you're just focused on what you want and what you're driving toward, that it's like, okay, I'm leaving that person behind, and then later on you're like, oh, well, come on, let's catch up, and he's like, you're going the wrong way. That disconnect can happen very easily if you're not communicating it
constantly.
It
has to be consistent. Very consistent.
There's a saying once that stuck with me. It said you can either be right or have your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And that was stuck with me. Not to never be right, but the goal behind it.
Because sometimes being right, by your own edification, you end up with the biggest loss.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
The biggest loss, and that being the relationship or the trust or the respect within the relationship. And once that has been fractured, if not completely damaged, the recovery is hard and long.
Yeah.
It's hard and long.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, you may have won the argument, but you lost the battle of keeping your marriage. And it's not, that's not the important part,
Yeah. Come to realize, what's really worth it? Is it worth it? Is this particular thing worth it? Coming to that realization is a huge deal. I don't know about you folks, but I think this has been a very healthy, productive session we had today. Put out a lot of information, being very authentic with, the things that we've experienced as spouses, and being in a military environment, having served myself, and then, you two guys having lived the life outside of the uniform with the uniform is very different, and it's important, and you play a significant role. So I want to say thank you for being the support that you've been for your service member, because we were on the same timeline. Hadn't been that long for me. And we say thank you to you too, because what you do is very important. Service members can't do the things that they do successfully if they don't have the structure and the support at home. And I think that gets missed. That message gets lost so much. It's important. So to all moms and wives that are out there in that role, thank you. It's appreciated. All right, until next time.
Bye-bye.